Mm. Hi, guys. How's everybody doing? I can see that I didn't turn my lights on. That's not a good thing. There we go. Uh, Terrific day outside here in Alabama. Hope everything is going fine for you guys. I'd be happy to take a topic suggestion, Travis. Fire away. As to random, there, I'd be delighted to discuss that case if I had read it. If I haven't read it, it would be an uninformed opinion, and I hate to do that to people because when I do those kinds of things, I'm usually wrong, and I don't like being wrong. And worse, I'd have somebody relying on me. But before I get into the sort of ask me anything, um, I wanted to go over a little bit of my history. I had the opportunity before he passed away last year to talk with one of my uncles who was on a destroyer in the Pacific during World War II, and it was really informational. The history that he had lived through was just tremendous. And my last birthday, first part of this month, was my 70th birthday. And I got to thinking I've probably seen and been a part of large parts of history that a lot of you guys may not be. And for that reason, I wanted to sort of go over a little bit of my history. I was born in 1955 in Kansas City, Missouri, to a single mom. It was 29 weeks gestation. I weighed 3.6 pounds. There were five doctors who at that time said, "There's no way this guy's going to make it." And one doctor who said, "I think I can pull him through." And he proved out to be right, not the five. So I've always been going with the lower percentage since then. I lived with my grandmother and my Aunt Naoma because my mom at the time was a terrible alcoholic. I moved to El Paso in 1960, back in 1961. And in 1963, I was in a classroom with Mrs. Hayes at Sacred Heart High School or Sacred Heart Elementary School in Sedalia, Missouri. And Mrs. Hayes was a wonderful person, and we were sitting there trying to learn penmanship. They gave each of us this really funky looking pen that was supposed to make it easy to write cursive. And to this day, I have trouble writing cursive. But the um, the janitor burst in through the door. It was November 22nd, 1963, and he said President Kennedy's been shot. And as I got to thinking about that and going through my memory at that time, there was not a single African American child in that school. Even though Brown versus Board of Education was decided in 1959, that was a Catholic school, so they didn't have to integrate. But when I went next year to a public school, there were no African Americans there either. And really, up through the time that I was in eighth grade in Sedalia, they didn't have the schools fully integrated. Um, they allowed, if they wanted to, African Americans to attend, but they didn't encourage it. Um, that I think was a huge stain on our country, and that's one of those things that bothers me even today. In 1965, I went with my mom for a short while up to Ellsworth Air Force Base in South Dakota. And during the winter of 1966, the snow was so big that it drifted up over the phone poles, and we dug tunnels in the snow to get to each other's houses. The kids did. It was a lot of fun. In 1967, I went to Vandenberg Air Force Base, and that was the very first time that I had any African Americans in school with me. When I came back to Sedalia in 68, there weren't any African Americans in my classrooms. And then in 1968, they had Kent State and the Democratic National Convention. I got to watch that live on TV. Um, Missing those things, missing that as part of your history, just reading about it in books is absolutely not like what goes on when you're there and you can see it. In 1970, after my mom had cleaned up her act, I went with her to the Philippines and we stayed there until, well, along with my sister Kathy, we stayed there until 1973 when Earl, who was our stepfather, died, and we came back to the United States. And then just a little while after we came back, the POWs from the Vietnam War returned. And I saw actually a lot of my friends from high school on television, and one of my friends, a guy by the name of Jeff Shearer, was a photographer, and he actually sold some of his photos to AP. He wound up becoming a photo editor for a major publication, I think, in Minnesota. Well, in 1974, I joined the military. I served in San Antonio, San Angelo, Texas, Korea, Fort Gordon, um, and over that period of time, Nixon resigned. In 1980, I left the Army. In 1981, Reagan was shot. And again, I can tell you exactly where I was when Reagan was shot. I was walking along a sidewalk in Kirksville, Missouri, and somebody came busting out of a bar called Two Talls and said they shot Reagan. That was an interesting part of our history too. In 1981, I went to respiratory therapy school, and I left there and went to Hastings, Nebraska for a short time. West Palm Beach, I spent a couple of years there, 5 years in Quincy, a little time at Mount Sinai in Connecticut, and then a year and a half at St. Charles in Toledo, Ohio. And then from 1990 to 1993, I went to law school. I clerked at the Supreme Court from 93 to 94. And then from 94 to 98, I spent that time in Kansas City working for a firm. And then in 1998, I joined the firm that I'm with, or I'm still of counsel, but not actively working for, in Jefferson City. And I was in their Jefferson City office well, I guess I'm still in their Jefferson City office on their website. All along the way, I went through a concealed carry course, started writing for the United States Concealed Carry Association, and from 2013 until now, I have been living in Florida with my wife, and we have two homes, one in Florida, one in Alabama. We spend a little time during the school year up in Alabama because we have grandchildren and we have to run them back and forth. So there we are. You know as much about me as most people will ever know. Melanie says she was stationed at Vandenberg. That's cool. What made me become an attorney? Well, it's funny when you find out you have a knack to do something. Um, I had an employee who was unfairly reprimanded by a nurse, and it went up through the chain of command, and they were fixing to fire that person. And I actually wrote that individual's review materials and submitted him, and went up and argued with the people who were in power at that time and told them they shouldn't fire this person, and eventually they agreed with me, and I think he got suspended for a day or two. The interesting part of all that is that I realized I was actually pretty good at putting something together for a case, and started looking at going to law school, and found St. Louis University, which specialized in health law, and I wanted to do that, so I went to St. Louis University for 3 years. I got a scholarship the second year and the third year, and I graduated number 7 in my class, top 3%, and magna cum, or not magna, but cum laude, and yeah, Order of the Woolsack. It's sort of like Order of the Coif, which is you see at a lot of non-Jesuit schools, but at Jesuit schools, you get the Order of the Woolsack. No, don't ask me to explain that because I don't have any idea what the Woolsack is, but um, that's why I went. I went because I figured out I could do some good. I could never make hospital administrators listen to me as a respiratory therapist, but somehow, as a lawyer, they tend to listen to you. So I satisfied my desire to be helpful, to change things. And I feel like I did a service to a lot of people that I represented, and stood for a lot of issues that I thought were important. All right. The way you bounced around the country. Yeah, well, there's a song by Johnny Cash called I've Been Everywhere, Man. I think I could probably sing that song just as well as he could. Um, I spent 3 years in the Philippines. Not many people have done that. Um, this last week, I went to the Arctic Circle, which only 1% of the people in the entire world have been to the Arctic Circle. Um, I'm willing to come on and debate you about your video on health insurance is paying for low value care. There are problems, but I think you were unfair to physicians. I worked last night. Okay. Um, I would be happy to do that if I could figure out how to have guests on this thing. I'll have to do some research on that. Maybe we'll do a Zoom call and record it. I don't know. Um, I may have been unfair to physicians, but it's not, and I want to make sure I clarify this. It's not all physicians who do this. Okay. I have a physician that I go to here in town that is very, very good. He listens to me. I just had a physical and a checkup this week. Listens to me. We talk about things, asks me what I want to do. I tell him, and he makes it happen. And I mean, I don't think he is involved in low value care. But there is another physician here in town who was charged by the federal government with healthcare fraud. And the reason that he was charged with healthcare fraud as a cardiologist is because he was implanting stents in people that really needed to have open heart surgery. And then when he got qualified in open heart, when one of his partners got qualified in open heart surgery, they started shunting everybody to open heart surgery. There are a lot of trends that develop in medicine, and there are a lot of regional issues. Um, as a respiratory therapist, I could never understand how in Florida from the moment somebody went on the mechanical ventilator, we worked on getting them off because those things are not good for people. Anytime you're forcing air into somebody, it's just not good. It causes barotrauma. And yet, when I moved to Illinois, the doctors there said, well, we want to rest them for a couple of days before we actually try to wean them. And I thought that was wrong, but that's a regional difference in the standard of care. It doesn't make the people in Illinois right. It doesn't make the people in Florida right. It's just different. There are a lot of things that are just different, but there are also a lot of issues in healthcare where people are not getting the full benefit. Um, let's see. What was the case you remember most and why? Uh, there are two of them. The first one was Eric Burns' case. Eric was a fellow who was working for a concrete company, and he essentially told his boss that his air tank was leaking air. So his boss let all the air out of the air tank, and even though he couldn't see real well, he used dollar store glasses. He welded the tank and told him to, quote, run it till it blows. Then he was using the tank and it was pressurized and he had water in it and he was hosing things down. He went to hang it up and hang up the wand, and the tank exploded and it caused severe injuries to him. Well, there was an issue in Missouri about whether he could sue under worker because workers' compensation is thought to be a complete remedy, even though it's clearly not. And so they had sued him, another firm had sued the guy who owned the company, not as the employer, but because he was the guy who welded the tank. And we ev my boss brought me that case and said, "You're the guy we go to when we're pretty sure we're gonna lose," which, really makes you feel good. But, maybe you can do something with this. So I won that case, and then less than a year later, the insurance company refused to pay it, and we took that up to the Supreme Court and won that one. So that was really good because we got some relief for a guy who really needed it. And then my last one was the Cockerham case where the insurance company just flatly refused to pay, and the insurance policy was pretty clear that they had to pay. The Supreme Court sided with me in that. Well, first, the Court of Appeals on the Eastern District sided with me, and then the trial court sided with me, and then the Eastern District Court of Appeals did again. So, from my point of view, it was a great case because that was the first $1 million judgment I ever got. And I never had measured my success in terms of the amount or number of judgments I got. I measured by virtue of how much good I did for people. And I felt like I did a lot of good in that case because I changed the insurance law on that particular issue. Okay. Travis says the case I would like to cover with you is from your home state, deals with 1983 actions, insurance coverage issues. There are many, many layers to it. Absolutely, bring it on. I'd be happy to just send me the case citation and I will I will look at it, and, we can have another live stream later on in the week, maybe Wednesday, if you wanna go through that case as well as, let's see, what was the other one? Why is my chat not moving? This is really interesting. For some reason, my chat has locked up. Um, hmm, not sure why that's the case. Live chat. Here we go. Okay, there we go. Sorry about that. I wanted to look at the first one that he talked about. Random talked about the case from Idaho. We can do that one too. Sorry, I'm still real rusty on this whole streaming thing, as you guys can probably tell. I don't feel like I have to explain that because you guys can see it. I have a question about jailhouse snitches. I saw one on the Donna Adelson trial, and the witness admitted to being convicted in many crimes involving dishonesty. How can one like how can one like that be allowed to let's see. How can they be allowed to testify? Because they're useful. Um, I had a situation where I defended a pimp who was a terrible person. Um, and, I impeached the witnesses against him who were ladies of the evening. And I showed that they were very clearly ladies of the evening. And one of the guys said, yeah, they were liars, but they weren't lying about him. And I think that's one of the reasons why they used it against Donna, because she was definitely trying to manipulate the system. And again, it's a stupid thing to do. You hire a lawyer, you let them defend the case. You don't try and create additional testimony for yourself because, as obviously, it backfired hardly against her. Lawyers charge up to 1,000 an hour. Funny how by omission you leave out that fact. Well, actually, lawyers charge much more than that. In the bankruptcy case that I was involved with up in Delaware, one of the lawyers was charging $1,800 an hour. Um, yeah, I mean, there's plenty of fault to go along on all sides if you want to get into that. But I don't omit it because I don't want to talk about it. I'm happy to talk about it. I believe that every lawyer has an ethical duty to charge a reasonable fee. I think $1,800 an hour is clearly an unreasonable fee. You should not base your fee on what the client can pay. You should base your fee on what the value of your services are, and that's what he didn't do. Um, let's see. Um, I'm willing to come on and debate you. Again, I'll be happy to do that, but um, I'd like to discuss it offline. My email is aldewit7@gmail.com. Send me an email and, we'll work it out. We'll probably have to do it on Zoom and then I'll post it on YouTube. Um, let's see. Travelers subsidiary ordered to pay 44 million in wrongful conviction case. Interesting. June of 2025. I will look that up right away. That's going to be fun. You very rarely do I hear lawyers talk about low value care. You could argue lawyers set up and benefit over a system of low value legal care that only the rich benefit from. You could argue that, and I think that's true. I think that anytime a person's ability to defend themselves rests on how much money they can muster to pay off a lawyer, I think it jeopardizes the ability to get due process. But I didn't, I don't know how to fix that because it's a free country and we do have some protections involved. They're not robust. I'll give you that. Um, if you can think of a way to solve that problem, I'm all ears. Uh, do you agree with hospital reforms to make medical decisions more collegial among doctors and nurses rather than hierarchical, favoring the most senior doctor? Absolutely. I can't tell you how many mistakes I saw doctors make when I worked in the healthcare system. Um, and most of the time, those mistakes were caught and corrected by nurses. Every now and then, one would slip through and something terrible would happen. Um, and it was fairly rare for a doctor to ever admit that he'd made a mistake. And I think a lot of that has to do with how they're trained. Uh, it's just the way I think they're convinced that if they realize they occasionally make mistakes, they might get paralysis of analysis or something. Again, 99% of doctors out there are good people. It only takes 1% to ruin the whole bunch. Same thing with lawyers. Somebody would say it only takes 40% to ruin the whole bunch, but there's obviously a lot more than 1% of the lawyers out there who could use a good slap upside the head. Um, yes, my specialty for the most part, the patients are indigent, very sick, and I would argue lawyers are responsible for a great deal of the defensive medicine. Well, you could look at it from either way, right? You could look at it from the standpoint of defensive medicine uh, being some kind of shield against negligence, or you could look at it from the standpoint of defensive medicine simply being an excuse for not knowing which tests to run. And pardon me, unfortunately, a lot of times what I've seen is doctors doing every test known to man and then even then not being able to figure out the results. But it does, I think, in some ways favor it certainly favors the doctor to do more tests than less. And maybe that's because of lawyers, but it's also because a lot of people do get injured and can't get compensation for it. And a lot of the times that's because nobody is at fault. Sometimes bad stuff just happens. And I've seen a lot of bad stuff just happen that involved absolutely no negligence. Um, it was a patient that we took care of who was in a she was a pregnant mom. She was, I think, 17 years old when she delivered, and she had a massive DIC, which is all of her platelets essentially congregated in one area, and she wound up bleeding out through all of her pores and through her birth canal. And as a result of that, they had to give her 210 units of blood and blood byproducts, and she wound up developing A's. And again, nobody's fault. Stuff just happens. Tragic result, though. Let's see. Somebody says health insurance companies are the worst. Couldn't agree more. Uh, Cole County Circuit Court Cotton Walker upheld that finding in his Monday order as he calculated how much money the company would pay, mostly as a punishment under a Missouri law capping such. Yeah, Missouri has a lot of laws with regard to medical malpractice. Uh, Non-economic damages are capped. The reason they're capped is because, uh, I guess, because they are afraid that you know insurance companies will go out of business. That has rarely happened. Basically, if you look at what happens with medical negligence premiums or premiums for medical negligence insurance for doctors, you'll see that the rate hikes track with downturns in the stock market, which is where those companies invest their proceeds to try and be able to pay off anything that comes up. This is my first time being able to join a live stream. I just want to say how much I appreciate your channel. Your calm explanations rather than over white drama was exactly what I was looking for. I try to do that. I tried very hard. You'll have to pardon me. One second here. It is so much fun to be a respiratory therapist and know what that's all going on. At any rate, I do try to keep it calm. I try to stay away from politics as much as I can. I actually lost a lot of followers, I guess, in the last week because of some things that I said. I hate that, but I'm not going to quit being me because I've hurt somebody's feelings. I will certainly try not to hurt people's feelings, so I just try and stay away from things that where that might happen. My thoughts on Obamacare. It was a good thought, a good idea, but it just didn't work out the way they intended, and the system was way too overly complex. I am fundamentally against government uh, paid for healthcare. Like I think if you took the Medicare system and put it in for everybody, it would just overwhelm the Medicare system and nobody would wind up getting care or getting care that is as good as it should be. I'm part of a Medicare PPO, and I have really good health care through United Healthcare, and that's going to change in January to Humana, which is what I had before I had United Healthcare. Uh, for some reason, the entity that I get insurance through just changes back and forth periodically. I guess to keep them honest. Um, it was um, it was a good idea. I mean, he had everybody's best interest at heart, trying to solve a system and a problem that's been with us forever and ever. But the solution didn't fit the problem, and part of the reason the solution didn't fit the problem. Let me go back a little ways into 1981. In 1981, they changed the healthcare payment system from fee for service, which is, Joe Blow came into the hospital for an appendectomy, and the hospital charged $1,000 and the doctor charged 500, and the amount that they were paid from Medicare was a little bit less than that, paid for directly to the physician and to the hospital, fee for service, right? Um, and of course, under that system, the hospital has a lot of incentives to do things like give people IPPB treatments every 4 hours, even though IPPB treatments have never actually been shown to be worthwhile for patients. Um, you could do pretty much the same thing with an aerosol treatment and not have a risk of barotrauma. The and as a result of that, so the hospital bill kept going up and up and up because people would, increase. And part of the problem there was that the indigent care that the hospitals were paying for had to be paid for some way. So the aspirin that cost you, 5 cents out of a bottle from CVS, the hospital bills $15 for that, and the reason they do that is they're essentially shoving some of the costs of healthcare over onto the federal system in that way under that fee for service model. So they changed it to a prospective payment system. And basically they looked at years of claim data and they said, okay, an appendectomy should cost this, and a doctor should be paid this for doing an appendectomy. And anytime you trust the government to do something like that and put together a system and make it fair, it will work for a year or two. And then the healthcare entities, the hospitals especially, will figure out ways to get around that. And that's essentially what they did. And it's really amazing. I think the whole healthcare system needs to be reworked from top to bottom. I don't think anybody would disagree with that. Okay, sorry about this, guys. I'm trying to look at this. I delayed, let's see. I see errors all the time. Doctors, nurses, respiratory therapists. Oh, yeah. I make mistakes too. Sure. Maybe you were in a bad hospital. Hospitals with training programs. Training has a way of keeping you on your toes. Okay, that's a good point. Um, when I was at the hospital in West Palm Beach, Florida, I called it Our Lady of Perpetual Billing. It was the best health care I ever saw. It wasn't a teaching hospital, but we had really good doctors. Um, and I think when I worked at the University of, or I should say Toledo Hospital, which was a teaching hospital for the University of Toledo Medical School, um, I also saw exceptionally good care. Kathleen Parsons, the MD let my neck vertebrae pop through my skin a 7-month period after C3 T3 spinal fusion. The pictures are gross. I lost summary judgment. The MD has 7 lawsuits. Yeah, you know, I should probably tell you the way the way we look at it as lawyers is you can't take a medical negligence case unless you can be 99% sure you're going to win it. And that's very hard to do because most people don't want to think that their doctor is an idiot. I mean, I go to a doctor and I like him very much. He's a good friend. I don't want to think of him as an idiot, right? I happen to know that people can be idiots, but that's a different thing. As a result of that, I think a lot of times doctors get the benefit of the doubt, sometimes even when they shouldn't. I feel bad for you, Catherine, that happened. Um, I don't know how good your attorneys were. Maybe they were great, and there's no way to predict what a jury's going to do, which is exactly why, for the most part, you should always try to opt for a good settlement as opposed to a judgment. That's awful. I hate to hear that. Oh, let's see. Travis said something. Freestanding ERs are deadly, in my opinion. Well, they can be, although we have a freestanding one here in Auburn that is very good. Example: an RN gave sub-Q heparin intravenously by mistake. There were complications. We told the patient full disclosure and worked to mitigate. It wasn't an RN mistake, it was all our mistake. Well, that is exactly the way you should handle things. And one of the things that I have talked about relentlessly when I go and talk to nurses and doctors and respiratory therapists is sorry works. Almost every state has a statute on file that says an expression of regret about the way something ended. In other words, saying you're sorry that Mr. Jones died is different than saying, wow, we screwed up. I'm sure sorry he died. Because the first part of that is an admission of negligence. The second part doesn't count. And of course, most people don't hear the second part because they're still focused on the first part. So there is a way, the sorry works philosophy, it's out there on the internet if you want to look at it. It does work. And what I guess it's Nireland, I don't know how to pronounce that. Um, MD, what he says here about the RN and sub-Q heparin, that's exactly how you handle it. And in almost every case, you don't get sued. People don't sue people they like and trust. And the best way to not get sued is to be somebody that your patient can like. And I think, a lot of times that fails for people. Um, let's see. My family member owes the IRS thousands for her Obamacare. Well, yeah, I mean, like I said, it wasn't a perfect system. Award caps started to come in the mid-mal in 1980s to decrease cost of premiums to keep carriers in the state of Nevada adopted in about 90, Texas about the same time. New England has an exchange for docs. So does Kansas. Kansas has two levels of insurance. The state amount, which is essentially provided, I think they pay a part of their medical licensure fee to get into that system. And then you have to go through the state first, and if you don't, you lose the ability to proceed against the doctor. And there are very strict time deadlines in Kansas. It's a difficult place to practice law, frankly. Uh, I will not put, I have been taking legal classes for over 2 years. Catherine, good luck. I wish you the very best with that. And that's a good plan. Take the courses. Overtime administrators, non-medical paper pushers, what a great example. That is a great way of describing a lot of administrators. As a medical educator, it's getting harder to convince the smartest to take on 600K in debt when they can just do something else. And that's too. They say, why should I sacrifice a decade of my life and take on debt? I think it's a fair question, particularly if you're going to be locked into maybe making $150,000, $100,000 a year. There's a problem here I haven't seen anybody address yet, or at least I said I haven't seen it. Nope, somebody may have, but this whole thing with hospitalists. Here in the Opelika area, we have a big hospital, East Alabama Medical Center, and they have hospitalists. So my doctor, who's an internal medicine doctor, doesn't have to come see me at the hospital. And in fact, if I go into the hospital, I'm probably going to get one of their hospitalists as the person who will take care of me. And they're the reason they are doing that is to control costs. And they don't pay those doctors what they can earn in private practice. So again, you have to wonder about the incentives there. Should it be legal for pharmaceutical companies to advertise prescription drugs directly to consumers? Boy, good question. Um, I think it should be legal under the First Amendment to do that. I don't know that it should be unregulated. I think, you know, when you have a drug, and I have to ask why it is that nobody ever buys a vowel when they name some of these drugs. Um, that there's a long series of consonants and it comes out sounding like Yiddish or something. I don't know. The long the problem with advertising drugs is that they don't tell you what all of the side effects are. In many respects, because particularly when a drug is new, they don't know what all the side effects are. They know what the side effects they've seen in their controlled trials, but just like with the COVID vaccine, a lot of the sort of complications arose after that. Okay. Travis says the National Practitioner Data Bank was another thing that came about very slowly to begin to address physicians with repeated problems. Yes, the National Practitioner Data Bank was a good idea. And I think it does have an impact on failure physicians, people who just refuse to learn. And again, that's not most people. I brought my friend to stand-alone ER diagnosed with strangulated hernia within an hour, and the MD failed to transport him for over 8 hours. That was a 7-minute drive. The MD said was calling police. Interesting. That's probably not a good thing when you got a strangulated hernia. You want to try to get in there and save the bowel if you can. So I work as a nocturnist, hospitalist. I also supervise at nighttime. I'm the vintage to work before hospitalist. Medicine is super technical, and the average internist simply won't manage you well. I think you've got a point, particularly in the ICU. One place I believe they absolutely ought to have hospitalists is in the intensive care unit, cardiac care unit, neurointensive care unit, pediatric intensive care unit, and neonatal intensive care unit. You want the very best specialists in there, and you want them to be affiliated with the hospital so that when they need something, they can get it. And, one of the things that every hospital owns a certain number of ventilators, but in COVID, when everybody was getting put on a ventilator, you had all kinds of problems with not having enough ventilators. Thank you, Catherine. I appreciate the super chat. And so I do agree that hospitalists are very important in that regard. I'm not sure they're as important for the average patient who's, just in there for some other reason. Um, In the hospital, again, early in my career, we poo-pooed hospitalists, and I understand that. The only model you're going to see where the average internist will see you outpatient and inpatient is a concierge model. Yeah, concierge healthcare, again, that's kind of like the same thing we were talking about earlier, where only the people who are very wealthy get the best lawyers. It's only the people who are very wealthy can afford concierge healthcare. And uh, I think that sort of runs afoul of my belief in the Hippocratic Oath and what it stands for. Uh, but it's a very good point. Oh, let's see. Got to do my rounds now. Thanks for a great discussion. Well, Candace, good luck with the rounds. Hope everybody is feeling better today, and I appreciate you having been here. You can catch the rest of this later. Here, it'll be on YouTube on my channel. Let's see. Gosh, we've only been going for 38 minutes. Seems like we've been going for 2 hours. Oh my. Um, so it's interesting that we talk a lot about healthcare here and about medical negligence. The FDA, I just read, is rethinking TV advertising for prescription drugs. They're considering going back to eliminating television ads. I guess magazine ads will remain. Magazine ads, I think, for the most part, are not particularly effective. But I it's hard for me to process when I see one of these ads on television and after they talk, after they show the bathtubs with the people sitting in the bathtubs or, these people strolling through the park, then the guy comes on and says, in addition to uh, curing your herpes, this will also, make your left eye pop out and you're probably going to develop warts all over your body. Your hair is going to fall out and you're going to be ugly. And of course they say it in very quickly in a very low voice, as if they're disclosing all of the defects in the drug. And I think to a certain extent, if they've done a good job leading up to that point, people just ignore it, and they probably shouldn't. There's a lot of talk now about the problems that might be developing with these GLP drugs for diabetes and weight control. I'm not sure where that's going to wind up. The FDA, yeah, that's right. The National Practitioner Database is as good as the justice system, and all the settlements, they are not registered in the database. I don't know whether settlements register or not. I know judgments do, but I don't know. I'll have to look that one up. Um, so anyway, like I said, it's interesting to me that we talked a lot about healthcare, which I guess is something that everybody is fairly concerned with. It's something we all need. It's something we all at some point get. You know, I've had very few interactions with medicine on an emergency basis. Probably the last one. I mean, I have several times had medical misadventures when I was in the military. I was given triamcinolone acetonide along scar lines that are on either side of my throat here. Um, and the reason they're there is because I've had my jaw broken and moved forward because I had mandibular retrognathia, which is an overbite. And I went from 145 pounds on June 14th to 225 pounds on September 19th and developed rampant Cushing syndrome. I wound up developing steroid psychosis. It was a very, very difficult time for me. And again, it was nobody's fault. I found out from my mother much later that she'd had something similar happen when I was in utero. So, a lot of times it looks like maybe somebody screwed up, but at the end of the day, it's not always the case. And then I had an eye operation several years ago where um, the doctor put in the wrong lens. And then immediately after me developing that problem with the wrong lens, I wound up with herpes simplex in my eye. And I now have to take valcyclovir every day because I've been exposed to this. And it is such a bad thing that it will destroy the nerves in your eye. So I have to stay on it all the time. My heart is in the right place. Well, thank you. Again, I can clue you in the economics of it. Hospitalists do a better job. Admittedly, it seems less personal. We don't have enough MDs to accomplish the old fashioned. And that also is true. Like you say, it's hard to convince somebody to take on $600,000 in debt in order to earn that back over the next 30 years. Model of medicine, I had the benefit of doing both. I'm glad you did. I had the chance to work with some really great doctors and a couple of bums, but I think that's normal for everybody. I mean, what person in what job has ever had a perfect group of people to work with? There's always going to be somebody who is, just a half a bubble off. Happens in every profession. The study of ethics, legal and otherwise, is a hobby of mine. There was an interesting ethical issue taken up about 10 years ago, a drug that would treat serious illness, but it was $100,000 a dose. Yeah, I actually had a case similar to that. Aren't you seeing more nurse practitioners getting sued for malpractice? No, um, I think what happens is they tend to go after the deeper pockets with the doctors, saying that the doctors had a duty to supervise the nurse practitioner. But I do believe that every nurse practitioner should have her own policy of insurance because in the event that they actually are successful in going after the doctor, he has a right of indemnity against you, and having your own insurance would make that much more easy to go through. Um, Steroids can be very dangerous even when used by people who don't have terrible reactions to them. Yeah, they can. We had a patient who developed a vascular necrosis, basically the loss of all the blood vessels in his hip, and his hip just kind of disintegrated. It's pretty awful. Um, what do I do if the defense submits uncertified records and depositions and the judge accepted despite objection? How do I certify records for appeal in New York Fourth Department? Catherine, I have absolutely no idea, and I can't answer that question because I don't practice law in New York. I do know, I do know that there are a lot of different rules in New York. Gosh, I'm sorry. I wish I could help you, but I don't have the information. Are hospital-based doctors analogous to public defenders? Uh, I I don't think so. And the reason I don't think so is that A hospital-based doctor has gone through 4 years of medical school, law school's 3 years. He's gone through usually at least 3 and probably 4 years of residency. So he's learned how to treat patients at the bedside. He knows what the heck he's doing. And then maybe he tries to get in on a private practice and can't get in, and so he takes a job as a hospitalist. Or maybe he says, "You know what? I really want to help people, and I think this is the best way to do it." They're not becoming millionaires quickly, but what they are doing is they're doing a great service, I guess, to the people who need hospital care. And one of the problems in a lot of hospitals, particularly smaller hospitals and rural hospitals, is that physicians are not immediately available. I'll never forget, we had a baby who developed a pneumopericar well, pneumopericardium. Gosh, I wish I could talk today. Pneumopericardium is where you have air in the pericardial sac, and the only way to get it out is to do a pericardiocentesis. And the neonatologist was 35 minutes away from the hospital, and the kid was crashing fast. And a respiratory therapist, this was at a hospital in Florida, a respiratory therapist did that pneumopericardioscentesis and effectively saved the child's life, but he came about that close to getting fired for having done it. If it hadn't worked out, he would have been in great trouble. So for me, in my view, like I said earlier, I think neonatologists and all of the ICUs need to have hospitalists. Um, it's not really like a public defender there. It's more like having somebody to cover. It's like having an ER doctor. It's like having somebody to cover the ER, cover the most places where it is likely for there to be a life or death event. Did you see where HCA tried to put a gag order on the nurse who was severely assaulted by a patient? I feel like that was re-victimizing the defendant. I didn't see that, but again, I don't understand how they could do that. I should get my own policy on the hospital's insurance. Um, you should get your own policy independent of the hospital's insurance. And the reason I say that is because the hospital buys insurance to cover the hospital, and the lawyers, while they will probably be helpful to you, they owe their duty only to the hospital. If they have to throw you under the bus, they're going to do it. Pediatricians are underpaid and so needed. Yes, I have a daughter who is a pediatrician, and she is underpaid and she is very much needed. She has a large group of patients who are uh, indigent. Probably 65% of her practice is Medicaid patients, and the reimbursement on Medicaid is terrible. Uh, what do you believe the legal scope of care should be for nurse practitioners relative to doctors? I'm I'm not competent to answer that. Usually, standards of care are set by the group of professionals who are engaged in that profession. So that profession should set its own standards of care and then adhere to them. And assuming that they do, they're not going to be held liable for negligence if they adhered to the standard of care. The definition of medical negligence is failure to meet the standard of care, failure to do that which a reasonable and prudent practitioner would do in the same or similar situation. And as a result, if the same or similar practitioner would do the same thing that you did, you're probably not negligent. Um, every settlement is required to be reported to the National Practitioner Data Bank. I thought that was the case, but I wasn't sure. Um, in most states, it is a crime for an insurer not reporting a settlement or a doctor if no insurance. Hospitalists are not the failed docs. Some like hospital work and are good at it. In general, it shifts so it gives you often a week off after a week's work. And again, a lot of times those guys wind up having to sleep there at the hospital. And, they wind up seeing their wife when she comes to eat in the hospital cafeteria. And then later in the ER when she has to have her stomach pumped. Just kidding. Um, okay, I missed Katie Cotton here. Let me go back and find the first part of this one. Uh, steroids can be very dangerous, even when people use them don't have terrible reactions to them. Otherwise, the baby might have died. Yeah, I might have died if they hadn't given steroids to my mom, because steroids will, in some ways, improve the um, production of surfactant in a premature child. You need a constant presence in the ICU and ER. Agreed. Scope of practice for NPs are state specific and very rigid. I would agree with that too. I misstated the word settlements. We have under the table deals, also do LNC work. Not sure what LNC is. I know what LNG is. It's liquefied natural gas. National gas. That sounds like something like a body problem. Ah, gosh, I hope somebody would ask a question. Anybody who asks about talking about a case, I know several of you have, send me the case and I will look at it and we'll make that happen. Like I said, we probably wind up doing it by Zoom, but we will make it happen. Legal nurse consulting. Ah, good point. People forget hospitals are not banks. At night, I supervise residents and admit and manage patients. Someone has to do it. How true. You know, one of the problems, well, I guess I shouldn't say problems. One of the things that irritated me on her behalf is that um, once our daughter left a group practice where there were 3 or 4 doctors and moved on her own, the hospital terminated her admitting privileges because she couldn't cover those patients in the hospital, and then proceeded to hire a bunch of hospitalists who were pediatricians. So I don't understand what the rationale was, but again, it's the way life goes. Do you miss being a respiratory therapist ever? Every time I hear a siren on an ambulance, I miss it. You know, I really loved what I did. I loved helping people. I loved being at the head of the bed. I would stand at the head of the bed, and my job, I took this on personally. My job was to calm everybody the heck down. All right, got an IV in, everything's going fine. I got an airway, we're ventilating, pulse oximeter looks better, you know, still don't have a heartbeat. Let's stop CPR. Eventually a doctor comes in and takes over, but you still have to remind people, I had a situation once where the IV that had been placed in the hand was blown and they wanted to give epinephrine. And epinephrine is a drug that is used to stimulate automaticity in the heart, make it beat. And as a result, they didn't have a line to give that. They were busy working on trying to get another line on somebody who had very low blood pressure. So I disconnected the ambu bag and I said, give it down the ET tube, which is right in the ACLS manual, by the way. The nurse was like, what? I said, no, give it down the ET tube. So she handed me the syringe and I administered the epinephrine down the endotracheal tube, bagged it in. It had its effect. We wound up losing that code, but I had done the right thing. And the director of nurses read me the riot act. She said, that's not an approved method. So I went and took my ACLS manual and put it down on her desk and saying, are you going to argue with the American Heart Association or am I right? And she decided, after all, that I was right. And by the way, nurses and respiratory therapists often don't get along in some big hospitals, but for the most part, we respect the heck out of each other. I love nurses. I think they are great people. A lot of people think nursing is sort of this glamorous job where you get in and get to go in and give back rubs, and that's not it. It's a very physically demanding job. You have to lift patients up, and you have to deal with all of the bodily secretions with the exception of mucus, which is my job as a therapist. You have to deal with I always say that's their job is anything that comes out of a body below the neck. That's theirs. The rest of it is my job. And I, like I said, nurses have a difficult role to play and a difficult job to do. And I firmly believe that there are a lot of patients who are alive today because they had a good nurse. Who has the email? He said it at the top, aldwitt7 at gmail.com. And if you go to the end of any of my videos, it will be there. GALDewitt7@gmail.com. Thanks for asking, Travis. I should have reminded myself to do that again. California NPs are specializing. We need the reason MDs are not increasing proportionally. They still need to iron out the NP specialization. In my humble opinion, it's not robust enough. I would agree. Say that would about epinephrine stimulates. Say that what I said was that epinephrine stimulates the heart to beat. It increases the automaticity of the heart. NPs in California are allowed to be on medical staff. I think that's great. I really do. I mean, they're not doctors, but they do make healthcare decisions and they see patients in the hospital. And a lot of times they do procedures on those patients. I specialize in acute pain in the hospital, work for anesthesia. Oh, what a great job. You talk about somebody who really understands the human experience. It's people who deal in pain management. If they are successful, they keep patients out of, addiction to painkillers. And one of the toughest things to learn, I learned it with my back, is sometimes you just have to learn how to live with a little bit of pain because you can't medicate yourself into oblivion. Um, is there any particular civil case you wish you could have argued for, like against Philip Morris for using cartoon characters to sell cigarettes for children? Well, random, I did. I was actually in that case. I may have told this story before. Um, I worked with Judge Robertson, who was just off the Supreme Court. Chip Robertson and myself, Mary Winter, we were part of the Tobacco Project for the state of Missouri. And British American Tobacco challenged jurisdiction on the basis that they weren't present within the forum. And I think it was 48 hours before we were supposed to go argue the motion, they served an affidavit from a guy by the name of Strobaugh, who was a Harvard economist. And he had like, I don't know, it was a stack of paper like that. It was a good 7, 8 inches thick. And we broke it up amongst the three of us and we all went through and we found some tremendous stuff that was really on point for jurisdiction. And so I worked up a PowerPoint. I think it was 127 slides on PowerPoint for that particular argument. So we got to go um, first in that argument, or I'm sorry, I guess we got to go second because they challenged jurisdiction. This guy came in a $800 suit from New York, and he was just there to teach the rural people in St. Louis how the law really works, and that was kind of the affect he had. And he went through his presentation and sat down and made plans to light his cigar with a $100 bill later on. I guess I don't know. At any rate, Chip got up and we started going through all these documents that we'd pulled out of this affidavit that they had submitted, and they'd submitted it to the court. And when these slides would pop up with the sections that were taken out and bolded, um, people on the other side, I was sitting right next to the people at the defense table because it was a crowded courtroom, and you could hear them like, "Look, where did he get that?" It's really amazing to see some of the responses that they had to this. And he went through the whole 127 and he says, "You can see, Judge, we obviously have personal jurisdiction." And he hadn't even sat down when the other side jumped up and started railing about he got these documents from these are we never turned over these documents. I don't know how he got these documents. He must have gotten them in violation of a protective order. And he went through the protective orders in Ohio and Indiana, Illinois, one other place. They had protective orders. The I states didn't really have a very good result on the tobacco project. And as a result of that, he went through all this. And so the judge stopped him and said, Mr. Robertson, tell us, where'd you get these documents? We lifted up the stack of documents from Mr. Strobaugh and said, well, he got it from Mr. Storebought. The expert was store-bought, get it? But Strobaugh. He got it from this expert store-bought, and they didn't have anything to say after that. And it was great. It was one of the best times I ever had as a lawyer. I had a great boss. I had great people to work with, and the only real regret I have about that is we never got an answer on that motion because about 10 days after that motion was argued, Tobacco caved and agreed to settle the case with the attorneys general. Um, let's see. Let me go back here a little ways. As a retired RN, I loved RT, and they are a specialty and much respected. Well, thank you. I appreciate that. Automaticity. Yes, thank you. Uh, what state was your case in? I think it was in New York, I think is what she said. Um, I haven't heard that word, but I gather it means to cause autonomous activity of the heart to beat on its own. Yes. Um, totally respect you. Thank you for what you do, and you're a wealth of resources and very calming. Is there anything you have not done? You know, I hate to act like I have done everything because I haven't. I have a lot of holes in my knowledge. I mean, I could never talk bond law with anyone, public bonds like for utilities and that kind of stuff. I couldn't do that. I could probably bring myself up to speed on it pretty quickly, but no, I mean, I've done a lot of different things. I always told people I couldn't hold a job. I was in the military for 6 years. I was a respiratory therapist for 13 years. I was a lawyer for 30 years, and now I'm a YouTuber. Obviously, I can't hold a job. So uh, I wish there was something that I had not done. And I wish there were some of the things that I had done that I hadn't done. I haven't worked it yet, but my attending is going to give a talk on it. Oh, great. Good. All right. Good. Uh, my case is in New York. The former attorney said discovery was done. It was not. There is spoliation. I just lost summary judgment. Oh my. That was Catherine. I heard that too. I'm looking forward to using it in the place of oxycodone if possible. Uh, maybe I missed something here. I'm sure I did. Huh. Oh well. Um, I think Travis is trying to help out Catherine, which I fully support. So I, it's a difficult job doing this on YouTube because it's so diverse. I mean, you have civil cases that come up, you have criminal cases, and of course, the criminal cases have a lot of interest sometimes nationally, like Karen Reed, and sometimes locally, like Donna Adelson. What trial will you cover next? Well, right now I am covering the Suni Bell trial. Suni was a little, like 3 or 4 year old girl, lovely little girl who was killed in a drive-by shooting, and there were 4 or 5 men in a car that opened fire on her mother and uncle, and she was in the back seat, and she was sadly killed. And I think the state is trying very hard to do its best. I posted a video today of the cross examination on one of the firearms experts, and I honestly think they've got a pretty big hill to climb to get a conviction in that case. And that's a shame because having brought these kids to trial at this point, they can't be tried again if they lose. So I hope that, you know, the jury reaches the right result. That's what I would say. You've got multiple different firearms, some of which have not even been recovered yet. And the whole mess is just it's really hard to understand. And I've looked at it. I mean, I've looked at it and I'm still having trouble understanding it. Um, what legal reforms would be needed to facilitate more low-income housing? If you aren't sure, please review the first few episodes of Show Me a Hero by HBO. Legal reforms. I think first of all, you would have to do some legal reforms with regard to zoning. Um, a lot of a lot of locations Martha's Vineyard is a good example. Very strict zoning, and if you wanted to bring in low income housing, that would probably be prohibited by the local zoning ordinances. That'd be one of them, but I don't know much more than that. Oh, well, thank you, Katie. I appreciate that. I enjoyed Karen Reed a great deal, and I thought they got the right result all the way around. It was tremendous. Um, had an opportunity to exchange a couple of emails with one of the lawyers on that team, and I have to tell you, they were very professional. Um, Interested in the future trial of the women in Boston who killed her three kids, possibly due to psychosis. Yeah, I'd be interested in that too. I really love the fact that some jurisdictions are streaming their trials now because it's really the only way that the public ever has a realistic chance of participating in the quest for justice. And that's one of the things I think we ought to all sit down and write to our congressman and say, hey, make the federal courts open up for live streaming because we want to see justice being done. I think that's a good idea. Tell me what you think. Um, so, uh, been going for about an hour and 6 minutes. I'm happy to stay and answer a few more questions if anybody has any. If you'll pardon me for just a second, I have to run a little of the cotton out of my mouth. Ah, Diet Coke, the drink of champions. I'd love to be sponsored. Just kidding. Uh, yeah, more streaming does need to happen. The federal courts need to do it because I think the Diddy trial is a good example. Tremendous interest in that. Um, my thoughts on Grand's jury. I'm not sure what case you're referring to. What is your funniest case? Um, Let me think about that one. Uh, Gosh, you know, I believe that if you can't laugh, you can't learn. And so whenever I would do a case, uh, particularly for EMTs, paramedics, respiratory therapists, nurses, that kind of thing, I would always try to find the most outrageous one and talk about that. So probably the funniest case was a case involving the Mobile Ambulance Surgical Trust from Kansas City, MAST. And this was a case where you have to understand a little something about the process of intubation. Intubation, generally speaking, is a process where you use a thing called a laryngoscope and you pull up on the tongue and this part of the chin so that you can visualize the vocal cords and you pass a tube through it. That's normally the way you do it. But sometimes a patient, particularly somebody who's had a seizure or who is just really recalcitrant, will clamp down and you can't open the mouth. And you don't want to stick something in there and pry it open because you could bust a tooth out. So, in that situation, what we normally do is a nasotracheal intubation. But the trick to nasotracheal intubation is to advance the tube slowly. And when you hear it right before you hear air moving right in front of you, that means you're right in front of the trachea. You pass the tube right as somebody inhales and it goes down into their lungs and you make a good intubation. Well, in that particular case, the paramedic was a hot dog, and she couldn't get an intubation in the back of the ambulance when it was sitting still, and she told the driver she slapped on it, and she said, "Hey, let's go, we gotta go." So they cranked on the siren, and they're running down the street. They're running down city streets in the back of an ambulance with the siren going. Now, I don't know if you've ever been in the back of an ambulance with the siren going, but I can tell you, you can barely hear yourself think. And she testified in a deposition under oath that she heard the tube enter the lungs, which was absolutely nonsensical. And I I frankly used that case frequently to make fun of that paramedic because the result was just terrible. Um, because she clearly didn't hear that. She was lying, and you really shouldn't lie when you're under oath. I'm a nerd. Well, so am I. I'm a nerd as well. Tech nerd, legal nerd, medical nerd. Nothing wrong with nerds. Nerds unite. Lawsuits make me sick. With 30 plus years of nursing, I've never had to report anyone. I am glad. That's good. Uh, and a language nerd. Uh, I would guess that means you're multilingual. Uh, I used to know a little bit of Tagalog. I could sing the Ginebra San Miguel song, which tells you how I spent my 3 years in the Philippines. Um, there's a case right now, I think it's in Arkansas, where they don't have to go to the grand jury or have a prelim. They can proceed on just an information. Defense filed a motion to dismiss that violates due process. Um, have you heard about the robotic worm that was in the human trials last year to do intubations? I have not. That sounds very interesting. I know that fiber optic scopes have made it a lot easier. I learned to intubate years after residency. Our respiratory therapist and anesthesia did it. I had to learn airways as a necessity for our codes. Now our ER residents and attendings do most. And again, that's really good for them because they get good training doing that. And that's what you want. It's the case where the father shot and killed the child molester on bond who abducted his daughter. Yeah, I have heard of that case, and um, I think that's going to be a hard case for the state to win. They're going to have to get the right jury. I don't know that they should win it. I'm not sure what I would do. I know that I would hate to think that anybody would ever abduct a child of mine, but I know that it happens, and it's sad. It's people are such animals that do that kind of thing. You're the IT girl, I'm the IV queen. Okay, well, that's good. I really love the fact that you guys talk to one another in the chat. I think that's so cool. I really love this whole process of live streaming. I hope you guys do too. Indecent exposure. Any innocent people who represented, if someone is innocent, what recourse do they have? Thank you. Ah, I did represent an innocent person once. It was a doctor. Um, I may have told this story. The doctor was he was being pressured by his nurse to have a relationship with her, and he was gay. He wasn't really interested in having a relationship with her, and she kept pushing, and he wound up having the office manager fire her. So she came back in ostensibly to look at the employee manual, and while she was there, she stamped a bunch of prescription pads and then called the state and said he had signed pre-signed prescription pads that he gave out regularly, which wasn't true and which was a lie. Well, the investigator came in, told him to destroy them, and then they tried to prosecute him for it through the licensure system, and uh, I beat him because they'd spoliated the evidence. There was no way to prove they were stamped by virtue of the fact that they got rid of them. And then I had one other innocent person who happened to be a nurse, and he had just run afoul of the politics in a particular cardiothoracic unit. He was charged with medicating a patient. The clinical picture of the patients that he was charged with over medicating didn't didn't rationally reflect any over medication. And so I was able to do both of those. But I have to tell you, those are the cases that, I don't mind representing somebody I know who is guilty. I do my very best for them. But, if they get convicted, they get convicted because they did something awful. Those two people did something just great. They were fine people and they did the right thing. And people decided to have a run at them. That's the kind of stuff I absolutely can't stand. I don't know how you could live with yourself if you tried to take somebody's license away on false charges, which is what they did. Uh, that is a scary nurse. Yes, she was pretty scary. Um, is it okay if I tell you the name of the YouTube creator who has the video about the robotic intubation? Absolutely, you can tell me that. I do a lot of I do a lot of YouTube chatting. Well, that's good. So, um, I really appreciate everybody coming in on Sunday to talk with me and to share your thoughts. And oh, wait a minute, I got to go up here and look at this. I'd like to hear your thoughts in the future video about Show Me a Hero miniseries. The town held off low income housing for 6 years before a federal judge nuked their budget. You know, everybody needs a place to live. Uh, a lot of people who are homeless because of mental illness and because they choose that lifestyle. But it is an absolute travesty for someone to have to live in their car or live in an abandoned van or some other place like that simply because they cannot afford to do otherwise. And a lot of times, if you can't afford a place to live, there's no way you can make yourself presentable to go get a job and earn money so that you can be, you know, uh, effectively a part of the community. Sad. Thanks for Random for calling that to my attention. I will look at that miniseries. And I appreciate all the kind comments about the informative videos. Like and share and subscribe if you're not on here and you've not subscribed. I'd really appreciate it. As I said, I've lost a few subscribers this week. Um, that kind of goes with the territory. It's not the end of my life, and it's not the end of my world. I'll be okay. Um, I'm going to probably call an end to this. I agree with you, Catherine. This was amazing, and I will try my very best to have an absolutely wonderful Sunday. So thank you all for being here. I'm going to bring up the ending soon screen, and if anything comes up on the chat, I'll try and answer it. Katie, I see that. I will try and find that on YouTube and look at it. Sounds really interesting. You're welcome for the stream. I'm glad it was fun for you too.